Hello and welcome to my channel. Vice Rhino here. It's Meathead Monday, the day where I take a video from before my meaty head was on camera and redo it with my meaty head on camera. Today, I'm looking at a video from the Christianity Engaged channel called What Keeps Evolution Up at Night. And I'm just gonna warn you here, it is just a massive gish gallop of statements that are mostly unrelated to evolution, so we're likely going to be going all over the place for this one. And just to give you an idea of the potential quality of their arguments, this video is by the same people who put together the list of the top 10 reasons to believe in Jesus, and included on that list such things as the fact that people use Jesus' name as a swear word, at least in Christian cultures, the fact that we number our years based on an estimate of when Jesus might have been born that cannot possibly be correct, and the fact that the stories about Jesus say that Jesus did impossible things. So that's the quality of argumentation we should be ready for here. Let's go! Okay, I know nothing's been said yet, but as a fan of bad puns, I can't let this go without comment. The therapist's name is Hal V. Faith. Clearly they're going for a pun that will sound like have faith, but in order to get there, you have to not say V like the letter V, like you would anytime you say someone's name and include the initials. You have to actually make the V sound, which makes me wonder, is this guy a fan of Jur Tolkien or Tss Eliot? Even a bad pun has to at least make sense. A better name would be first initial B, middle name Leave, and last name Christian. Dr. B. Leave Christian. It is clunky, awkward, and feels forced, but at least it makes sense.
So what seems to be the problem, evolution?
I can't sleep, Doc. I've tried. Nothing works.
Okay, so as much as I do try to make my videos friendly to people who listen without watching, if you are listening to this one and not looking, you are missing out on a pretty amazing visual here. They've decided to personify evolution as a hybrid monkey, lizard, bird, octopus thing. It's actually funny, which is what they are going for, but one of the things that makes it funny is that it betrays the fact that they think evolution would necessitate the existence of hybrid animals like Kirk Cameron's crocoduck. Anyone who thinks that this is how evolution works doesn't actually know how evolution works, so this portrayal betrays their utter ignorance on the subject. A more sophisticated creationist might defend this choice by pointing out it's just a silly joke. But when you make silly jokes about such things, not everyone picks up on the fact that it's not even remotely accurate, and then you end up with people like Gene Kim. Don't make more Gene Kims. Also, this therapist is discount Chuck Norris. Chuckles Norris, if you will.
So what's going on?
Well, you know how I started out as an idea to explain how organisms adapt over time, right?
More accurately, it was originally formulated as an explanation for how so many species came to exist on one planet. Hence, the origin of species. And it's still an explanation of the origin of species, albeit one that we have a much better understanding of than we did in Darwin's time. You're close, though.
Well, there are so many questions about the creation of the universe and the evolution of man that I just can't answer.
Evolution has nothing to do with the origin of the universe. The book wasn't called On the Origin of Universes, it was called On the Origin of Species. And here's a fun fact about scientific research. When scientists run into a question for which they don't have an answer, the correct course of action is not to throw your hands in the air and toss everything you've discovered thus far into the garbage. It's to do more research and figure out the answer.
I thought I had all the right answers, but there's still so much I don't know.
Which is actually pretty damn exciting. Not knowing things means that there are new things we can learn. This is fantastic. Who would want to be stuck living in a world where there's nothing new to discover? How boring would that be? Leave it to religion to make the ability to learn new things into something bad that needs to be avoided.
For example, the Big Bang Theory is still the leading explanation about how the universe began, and it starts with a singularity followed by a period of rapid inflation. But there is still no explanation for how the singularity got there.
Yeah, so again, this is irrelevant to evolution. I'm just going to make that the last time I say it, so take that as an implied from now on every time he brings up something that isn't actually the diversification of species. And that includes abiogenesis. You can just mentally picture me saying that, yeah, it has nothing to do with evolution. So, the Big Bang Theory does not, strictly speaking, explain how the universe began. Rather, it models the behavior of the universe from its earliest known periods until the present time, and it can be used to extrapolate into the future. So, no, there isn't a widely accepted explanation for the origin of the singularity, which, to be clear, isn't necessarily some physical object. A singularity is a point at which the laws of physics as we understand them cease to function. There are different kinds of singularities depending on which property reaches infinity and causes the breakdown. Time-like singularities happen when the curvature of spacetime becomes infinite, which turns it into a trapped surface where time ceases to function, and that's the kind of singularity that gives us black holes. A space-like singularity is the one that might have existed before the Big Bang, and that is one where matter is forcibly compressed into a point of infinite density, which causes the rules that govern matter to break down. That said, general relativity actually breaks down before it quite gets to a singularity, so the Big Bang does not necessarily predict the existence of a singularity, as singularities are a function of general relativity. With regards to the question of what came before the Big Bang, the honest answer is that we don't actually know. And so we get to live in a time where it's possible that the question will be answered. I ask again, how boring would life be if we just gave up every time we ran into a question where the answer is I don't know?
Or how the first energy existed.
It's possible that energy is eternal. Well, I mean, there may well have been a time when time did not exist, though that certainly is the wrong way to say it, so energy might be eternal in the sense that it existed before time existed, inasmuch as the concept of before time existed is a coherent concept. It gets a bit wonky, on account of the whole laws of physics breaking down thing.
Or how the 4 fundamental forces were formed. The strong and weak nuclear forces, electromagnetism and gravity.
No, we don't know how the 4 fundamental forces formed. I'm tempted to say that the question itself is just nonsensical, but that would presuppose knowledge of the 4 fundamental forces that we just don't have yet. And just for background, the 4 fundamental forces are gravity, the weak force, electromagnetism, and the strong force. We're all familiar with gravity. The weak force is what causes particle decay and fusion, electromagnetism deals with charged particles and their interactions, and the strong force is basically what keeps the subatomic particles of atoms together. Obviously, these are gross oversimplifications, and it's actually possible that these 4 fundamental forces aren't fundamental. There may be one single force behind them all, but at this point, we don't know enough about the fundamental forces to even know for sure if they are in fact fundamental. And you're surprised that we still don't know their origin story? For all we know, it's not possible for them to be different. And that's without even getting into the different cosmological models that allow for an infinite number of universes, in parallel, in series, or both, which would allow for these forces to operate differently in each universe, thereby allowing life to develop in the universes that are capable of sustaining life. So, yeah, we don't exactly know where they came from, or why they are what they are, but there are several options that we know are possible.
Science has no clue.
On the contrary, science has several clues. We just haven't developed a way to put the various hypotheses to the test yet.
We know the universe had a beginning, but the best answer from some of the brightest scientific minds is that the universe created itself out of nothing.
Loaded language aside, that is but one hypothesis among many. And I may be wrong here, but I don't think it's the most popular one among cosmologists. And even if it were, every time I hear a cosmologist talk about what came before the Big Bang, they pretty much always caveat their statements by pointing out that there are many competing hypotheses, and we don't currently have the ability to figure out which one might be right.
And now, recent discoveries show that 96% of the universe is made of matter and energy we can't see, feel, touch, or even understand.
I don't really like that dark matter and dark energy get lumped together all the time. The word dark just means that at the moment we can't directly detect it or don't understand exactly what it is. So, to split them up, dark energy is the name given to the phenomenon that causes the expansion of the universe to accelerate. With our current models, the expansion of the universe should be slowing down as time goes on, but it's actually doing the opposite, and we haven't quite figured out why yet, so dark energy is essentially a placeholder for whatever is causing that. Again, there are multiple hypotheses, but none have clearly won out over the other ones, though there have been some clear losers. Dark matter is mass that, judging by the behavior of the observable matter in the universe, has to be there in order to account for gravitational effects. So we see a star move in this particular manner, therefore there must be mass gravitationally tugging on it in this particular direction. And again, there are many competing hypotheses as to what dark matter might be. It could just be normal baryonic matter that is hard for us to see. Baryonic matter being the type of matter that we're used to, matter made up of protons and neutrons. Non-baryonic matter is a broad category of all the other stuff, matter that is not made up of protons and neutrons, so electrons, neutrinos, photons, etc. So dark matter could be a collection of normal baryonic matter that we can't detect for one reason or another, or it could be something else. We don't know. But we actually do have some pretty good ideas of what dark matter is not. It is not antimatter, because the signature gamma rays that are emitted by matter-antimatter collisions are absent. It is not large dark clouds of baryonic matter, because that would absorb radiation that passes through them, and so would turn up on a spectroscope. And we know it's not large galaxy-sized black holes, because such black holes would show up through gravitational lensing. But as far as what it actually is, the leading hypothesis is that dark matter is made up of as-yet undiscovered particles such as axions, which are in a category of non-baryonic matter known as weakly interacting massive particles, abbreviated to WIMPs. But again, we haven't figured this thing that's not related to evolution out yet, therefore evolution is false. is an argument that just does not follow. If I ignore that it's a complete non sequitur, it ends up being an argument from ignorance. It's a fallacy wrapped up in another fallacy.
And to be honest, we actually know very little about the other 4%, which includes all the stars, planets, and galaxies in the universe that we can see.
Yeah, the universe is big. To expect that we should know the majority there is to know about it by now is a pretty massive display of hubris. We've only been studying it for about 10,000 years, if I'm generous, and you expect us to know the majority of what there is to know about the entire universe, including everything about its entire 13.8 billion year history?
I could see why this might be troubling you.
I can't. What troubles me is that apologists will often accuse atheists of robbing the world of its wonder. But here the creationists are, sitting there talking about how horrible it is that we don't know everything, that we still have stuff to learn, that there's still mysteries to be solved and problems to figure out, and things to wonder about. Meanwhile, they want to distill all that shit down to God. As though that is supposed to somehow create wonder.
And that's not all. I've been thinking about the probability of the universe creating itself out of nothing, and I just can't wrap my head around it.
Well, it's probably because that's a calculation that's impossible to do with the limited data that we have thus far. But of course, being a creationist, you're probably about to plug a bunch of completely arbitrary numbers into a formula to come up with an improbability factor that is so ridiculous it can't even account for 2 hitchhikers getting picked up before they die in the vacuum of space.
Energy, matter, and time, creating the 4 fundamental forces of nature, forming all the stars, the planets, and galaxies.
Okay, but one of those things directly follows from the other. If the fundamental forces are what they are, then stars, planets, and galaxies will form accordingly because of the fundamental forces. These are not independent and separate events, they are directly related.
All from completely random and unguided processes?
No, like I said, the fundamental forces guide the processes that determine how matter behaves. And like I said earlier, we don't even know if it's possible for the fundamental forces to be different than they are, so to just assume that they could have wound up being any random number is a completely baseless assumption.
It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, when you mischaracterize a bunch of stuff, it does tend to stop making sense.
But let's just go with it for a moment. Assume the improbability of the universe existing as I just mentioned. Do you know the odds of a planet within that universe possessing all the necessary requirements to support life?
No, and neither do you. But it is non-zero. And given how many small rocky planets exist within their star's habitable zone, which we have observed, then conservatively speaking, there are at least 300 million of them just in the Milky Way galaxy, with the upper estimate hitting 40 billion. So given how many of them there are in our own galaxy, and given how many galaxies there are in the universe, I'm just going to go ahead and say that the odds of one of them turning out like Earth are pretty good.
We're talking about over 200 parameters. It would need the right temperature, which requires a certain proximity to a star, the right atmosphere to regulate temperature and protect from the star's radiation, a large planet like Jupiter to attract incoming asteroids, an abundance of liquid water, plenty of nutrients, and the list goes on and on.
Yep. There's a lot that has to work in our favor in order for Earth to be habitable. But again, given how many planets there are that have the potential to have those characteristics, it's not really surprising that at least one of them does. And that's just considering life as we know it. There may be life out there in the universe somewhere, which exists on a planet that would be completely inhospitable to even the most extreme of the extremophiles that can be found here on Earth. And that life might be looking out at the universe, seeing all of the Earth-like planets out there, and declaring that their god must have designed the universe just for them, because there's way too many Earth-like planets in the universe. They needed their specific type of planet around their specific type of star in order for life as they know it to work.
The probability of Earth prevailing by random chance is absolutely inconceivable.
Yeah, but who said it had to be random chance? That's something I hear from creationists all the time, but I've never actually heard an astrophysicist or cosmologist talking about the formation of the Earth or universe as a completely random chance event.
Statistically speaking, it's practically impossible.
And if it's practically impossible, then that means that it is possible, but highly improbable. Given the size of the universe and how long it's been around for, we can expect that many, many extremely improbable events have happened in it. In fact, they are happening all the time. Do you know how improbable it is that all of my ancestors would have combined their genetic material and had just the right mutations to eventually produce me? And all of your ancestors had to have all the right combinations and mutations in their genetic material to produce you. The same goes for every single person on the planet. For any particular individual person to exist is practically impossible. So, possible, but highly improbable. Literally any mundane event can be stated in terms that make it sound like a statistical impossibility.
And that's just where I get started. Even if everyone accepts the idea of the universe creating itself out of nothing and the statistical miracle of Earth's existence and its unique ability to support life, now they expect me to explain how molecules came together to form living organisms.
Nope, that's abiogenesis. And again, while there is a shit ton of research being done on abiogenesis that gives us a really good idea of how it probably happened, we don't know all the details of every single step for sure at this time. Though, if I'm being honest, one of the bigger problems with origin of life research is that we have too many potential pathways for life to take, and the difficulty is figuring out which of these potential pathways it actually took.
And eventually evolved into humans over time.
And we finally get to evolution! I mean, we're only halfway through the video. That's usually about how long it takes for a creationist to get to their main topic, so par for the course, I guess.
And I'm discovering so many gaps in my knowledge.
And do you think those gaps perhaps would be a good place to put your god? Because that's what you seem to be going for here. You're literally just a couple of words away from having actually made the fallacious argument with the exact name of the fallacy.
Can you give me any examples?
Of course. Even with all our advanced technology we have today, scientists can't replicate the production of single-celled animals from the primordial soup.
So? There are plenty of natural processes that happen all the time that even with all of our modern technology, we can't duplicate them in a lab. That has no bearing whatsoever on whether or not they happen. Hell, pregnancy is something that we can't do in a lab. Scientists are unable to bring a fetus to term using their science-y technology. You are using scientists' inability to recreate abiogenesis to say that abiogenesis can't have happened. And yet, we are all here existing because we went through a natural process that scientists are unable to recreate, pregnancy and birth. Using creationist logic, the human race does not exist because scientists can't completely duplicate human reproduction in a lab. But of course, we're also left with an issue where science keeps advancing and learning how to do new things. A little over a century ago, I guess birds couldn't fly because humans hadn't figured out how to make things fly yet. And I'm so glad that human history was entirely free of infectious disease up until humans learned how to grow bacteria and viruses in the lab. That surely worked out well during the Black Plague. If you are using humanity's ability or inability to do something as evidence that this thing is impossible, then you are creating a patently absurd measuring stick.
We can't prove how single-celled animals evolved to become multi-celled animals with completely different cell structures.
Well, not only do we have some pretty good ideas about how that could have happened, but that actually is one that we have managed to do in the lab. So using your measuring stick of possibility, that one should be possible even in your worldview because we did it. Also, it's an easy enough process that it seems to have happened fairly frequently on the early Earth. Or at least, we have evidence of several instances where multicellularity developed independently.
And we certainly can't explain how eyes, ears, brain tissue, and lung tissue developed from a single cell.
See, now this is the problem with Gish Galloping. You get to throw out all these things together in a big clump and then claim we have no answer. And when I answer, I either have to give a detailed account of everything you just ran through, which to do so thoroughly would take at least a few hours, or else I can offer summaries and partial explanations, which will then leave the door open for you to find the areas that I inevitably missed or summarized less than perfectly, in order that you might say, aha! You might be able to explain away this, that, and the other, but you failed to explain away X. So for brevity's sake, let's just focus on the brain. The brain is an organ whose primary purpose is, essentially, to coordinate the actions of all the individual cells and organs throughout the body. It accomplishes this through a variety of mechanisms, from hormones to electrical impulses to other chemical signaling. Researchers have found that most of the major components required for the transmission of electrical and chemical signals can be found in a type of single-celled organism known as a choanoflagellate, which I'm sure I pronounced that incorrectly, but there we go. This is not entirely surprising, but it is significant, as this is the group of single-celled organisms that is thought to be the common ancestor for all animals about 850 million years ago. This suggests that the major components that could be used to build up simple brains were already there when animals first developed. Once multicellularity developed, the first step toward developing a brain was the streamlining of the chemical signaling process. Cells developed that could use electrical impulses to send chemical signals to each other over short distances, thereby speeding up the reaction time, and these were the beginning of a nerve net. From there, some neurons began to develop in groups. This would allow for the processing of information rather than just a direct stimulus-response reaction, thereby allowing these animals to begin responding to their environments in more complex ways. Then, about 500 million years ago, after the development of these simple neuronal groupings, there were two whole genome duplication events in the chordate lineage. This provided a plethora of extra genetic material already programmed to build basic brain material, which could then, through mutation and natural selection, develop larger, more specialized brains. About 200 million years ago, as the lineage that led to modern mammals diverged from the reptile-bird lineage, the competition for survival between the proto-mammals and the dinosaurs led the proto-mammals to develop larger brains relative to their body size, starting with the olfactory bulb, allowing these early mammals to sniff out food that might be missed by the dinosaurs. Then we yada yada through a few million more years of history, and the pressures after the dinosaur extinction led to the developments that eventually allowed for the evolution of the human brain. This is a very, very basic summary of how the brain likely developed, and it is a simplification of a simplification of the process. There really is a lot of research into the topic that you are free to look into anytime you like if you actually want answers to these questions. But in my experience, creationists don't like the actual answers. They prefer the I don't know answers that can be used to stuff God into the equation.
Or how single-sex organisms evolved into males and females that sexually reproduce.
Again, the answer is there if you're willing to look for it. As with multicellularity, sexual differentiation has evolved multiple times in multiple lineages, leading to several modern species that do things quite differently from the way we are used to. But the gist of it is this. It most likely started with simple organisms that were capable of reproducing asexually, but which developed methods for the simple swapping of genetic material. Over time, these swaps specialized into cells known as gametes. Initially, the gametes were all the same, but to make the transfer process easier, some differentiation developed. Not quite sexes, but mating types, making it easier for some to give gametes and others to receive gametes. Once this differentiation occurred, it then made it easier for the gametes to differentiate in order to make the process more efficient. And then we yada yada through a few million years and boom! Penis! Actually, fun fact, penises appear to have their evolutionary origin in a mutation in the location of where the cloaca develops in a fetus. Researchers grafted cloacal tissue next to the limb bud of chicken fetuses, and the result was a cock that grew a cock. I mean, I might be exaggerating a bit. They started to grow external genitalia, but I didn't see anything about them finishing the process, so it probably didn't grow into a full-blown penis. But hey, another fun fact, you may not know this, but snakes have two penises, and they develop right where the leg buds begin to grow in the snake fetus. And guess what else? You know how most mammals only have one penis? Well, they develop in the same area as the tail bud. So it looks like how many penises an animal has is a result of where the cloaca moved on the fetus. If you put it where two legs come out, you get two penises, but put it where one tail comes out and you get one.
And here's the thing. Even if I could explain all that, I still have no way of explaining the lack of complete fossil evidence to support mankind evolving from apes at the other end of the spectrum.
The word complete in that sentence is doing a hell of a lot of heavy lifting. We have plenty of fossil evidence for this transition. And this video still has a bit left to go, so rather than go into detail here, I'll just leave a card to a previous video of mine where I discuss human evolution by way of responding to Abiogenesis.
It's just completely overwhelming what they expect of me.
Well, it sounds like you're really starting to have some doubts, evolution. So do you still have some faith in your theories?
No, because faith, as defined in the Bible, is the assurance of things hoped for and the convictions of things not seen. In other words, belief without evidence. But there is tons of evidence for evolution. Finding a few unanswered questions does not negate any of the evidence, even if I were unable to find a lot of the answers to the questions you're asking without much trouble.
Well, even the guy who got me started, Charles Darwin, had his doubts.
That is completely irrelevant. Darwin himself could have recanted and become an outspoken young Earth creationist after having published his book, and the study of evolution would have carried on happily without him. Science does not have authority figures like religion does. We don't have any person who is supposed to be infallible with whom we must agree on every point. In fact, science works in rather the opposite way. The scientific method is designed to essentially try and prove hypotheses wrong. You hypothesize, then figure out what would prove that hypothesis wrong, then try to prove it wrong. If you fail, then other scientists come at it from different angles, finding new ways to prove it wrong. And only after it has failed to be proven wrong from several different angles does it tentatively become regarded as a scientific fact, pending the potential future discovery of something that proves it wrong, of course.
I don't know. I guess I have doubts of my own, but I don't really have another plausible alternative.
You don't need a plausible alternative in order to prove something wrong. The plausible alternative comes later. Some of the worst science gets done when researchers come up with a plausible alternative in advance of proving the accepted hypothesis wrong. This is how you end up with fringe groups like the Birds Are Not Dinosaurs organization, who have their plausible alternative already worked out, and so rather than accept the science that goes against their hypothesis, they try to twist things to fit into their alternative, and it doesn't really work. Plausible alternatives are what you look for after evidence comes to light that casts doubt on the current accepted hypothesis, not before. And so far, you don't have evidence, you just have unanswered questions. Or rather, questions whose answers you are ignoring.
Actually, we do have another alternative.
Is the alternative magic? I feel like the alternative's going to be magic.
One that I believe has more proof and less gaps. The universe was intelligently designed by an eternal creator God who fine-tuned the cosmos to create a planet that would support life for you and me. He skillfully crafted all living organisms to inhabit this special planet.
Yeah, magic. Great. Yeah, it has fewer gaps. But that's because you can use that as an answer to literally any question you care to think of. And an answer that equally answers every conceivable question isn't really an answer at all. Call me when you figure out a mechanism that God used to do anything. Tell me exactly how he did a thing. Anything. You choose the thing. And nothing vague like he formed man from the dust of the ground. Specifics. What process did he use to convert dust to flesh and blood? Breathing on it? How does that work? How does God breath convert dust into a living organism? Can it be replicated in a lab with all our fancy schmancy modern technology? You said this answer is supposed to fill in the gaps, so get filling. Give us some real answers.
And he crowned his creation by making human beings in his image.
And what that even means is a whole other can of worms that I don't really want to get into in this video.
He gave us many wonderful qualities that set us apart from everything else that he made.
Name one. I'll bet we'll be able to find it in another species somewhere. Often in a more basal form, kind of like what would be expected if such traits evolved rather than having been specially created, but it's there.
One of these is our intellect.
Okay, intellect. Well, here's the thing. Animals that are intellectually most similar to us tend to be most closely related to us. Almost like it's an evolved trait.
He gave us minds that feel a pressing need to understand where we came from and discover our purpose.
Well, those kinds of subjective feelings are difficult, if not impossible, to measure in other animals. Certainly there are many that express things like curiosity, and despite having killed the cat, curiosity actually seems to be a trait that is very widespread throughout the animal kingdom, which suggests that there is a survival advantage to being curious. So, tell you what, you figure out how to test for a sense of purpose in non-human animals, do that research, publish your results, and then we'll talk about that one. In my opinion, that sort of feeling is likely a byproduct of the trait of curiosity.
Some people believe that life just happened by accident, and they explain the complexities of our existence from the wonders in space to the information coded in our very DNA as simply a result of time, matter, and random chance. They believe there is no design, no designer, and ultimately no meaning or purpose for our existence.
Ultimately, there probably isn't a meaning to our lives. Why this should have an impact on whether or not our lives have meaning in the moment is just beyond me. I have experiences. I have good reason to believe that the other people I interact with also have experiences. I prefer to have good experiences, and I also have empathy, so I enjoy helping other people have good experiences too. And so a good purpose, in my opinion, is to live your life in a way as to maximize the good experiences for yourself and those you interact with. And hey, speaking of trying to make people's lives better, it's fundraiser time again, so if you go to donate.vicerhino.com, you can donate to Project Share. Help make people's lives better. Go for it.
Quite honestly, I believe that view requires more faith than I have.
Well, this is a nice slippery little game where faith is obviously a bad thing. I don't have enough faith to hold your position, but then point out that faith is belief without evidence, and evolution has evidence while God does not, and suddenly faith becomes a synonym for trust, and it's a good thing to have. The definition of faith that apologists use tends to shift depending on what is convenient in the moment. Thanks for watching. My media head will return on another Monday, but if you need to get your Rhino fix in before then, I livestream with Sirs every Wednesday at 8:30 Eastern on my other channel, The Watering Hole. Thanks to Piper for being my editor, and special thanks as always to my patrons, who are the octopus tentacle that is attached to the monkey's body that is my channel. If you'd like to be a severe misunderstanding of evolution, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino, or by supporting the channel in one of the other methods that can be found at links.vicerhino.com, which is also where you'll find links to my other projects. If for whatever reason you want to send me stuff, my P.O. Box address is in the description. See you next time!